Ukraine strikes the Russian rear with drones and hits an important aircraft factory that produces strategic planes that are essential and extremely important for the Russian war effort, while the fighting along the front line obviously continues, even though there is not much movement that can be observed. For now, at least, the Ukrainians have more or less managed to stabilize the front line. At the same time, though, we have a lot of news from the rear areas, be it troop mobilization, be it reinforcements, but also a disturbing video about a potentially successful strike against important air defense installations. But we'll talk about this and more in this situation report. We'll immediately continue with the situation report. I just want to mention that there is a donation campaign for pickups that are used to evacuate heavily injured personnel. I'll talk more about this at the end of the video. The link to the donation campaign is in the description. We'll start off with the overall situation. The Ukrainians did do air attacks. We have a report here of 47 drones being used here, and as you can see, there is a big explosion in the background. This strike hit Taganrog, which is down here quite close to the border, and it did hit the Beriev installation. Beriev is important. They make ekranoplans, they make amphibious warships, but they also build the A-50 and the A-100. Those are basically Russia's AWACS, of which the Ukrainian Air Force has just shot down 2 within a few weeks. They are important for overall surveillance. Their radar can look deep into the Ukrainian rear and thus give warning time in case of cruise missile attacks, and it will allow the Russians to better attack Ukrainian airplanes, especially once the F-16s come. Now, while the installation was hit, we have some pictures here of a darkening on the roof. It seems like this is probably not stopping the production as of now, but we'll have to see if we'll get more information, and obviously the Ukrainians can repeat the airstrike. We also have news from Odessa. In the last situation report, I mentioned that there were some rumors that the Russians did a ballistic missile attack on the convoy of Zelensky, trying to kill him. It seems clear by now that this was not the case, but Zelensky confirmed that it was fairly close to him and Mitsotakis, the Greek prime minister, when they met, that the ballistic missile hit. The talk is about between 300 to 500 meters away, so it was fairly close, but both of them were not in immediate danger of this attack. Let's switch over to the front line, and north of the Seversky Donetsk, we do not see much change. Now, there are some fresh geolocalizations inside of Sinkivka, but all of them are in the area that is being considered gray area or contested area. So we see the Russians still attacking in this area. I cannot see that they have established a foothold further south, so the front line seems to be more or less unchanged north of the Seversky Donetsk. South of the Seversky Donetsk, the fighting is continuing. Now, there are some rumors about Ivanivske, that there are some Russian claims that they managed to capture it, but as of now, I do not see any proof, so it seems that the front line is unchanged here as well, at least as of now. The front line is somewhat changing, though, in the area of Avdiivka. Here, the Russians had 2 additional successes. Southwest of Olivka, they managed to advance roughly in this area here, extending their foothold in the windbreaker tree lines here, as well as advancing somewhat in that close to that body of water here. And in Tonenke, they managed to advance 1.2 kilometers in depth and 2 kilometers in width into the town itself, which is now heavily under pressure and in danger of being overrun as well. But overall, the front line there, while especially the advance in Tonenke is important, overall the front line has not really changed in this area. Tonenke obviously could be evacuated by the Ukrainians fairly soon, so something might change there fairly soon again. Further south, we have additional reports of Russian attacks in the direction of Herohivka. I cannot confirm fresh changes in territory, but we have a new geolocalization from Novomikhailivka, and this is here with Telegram, and then it's geolocalized right to the western edge of Novomikhailivka, basically showing us that the Russians have reached that point too. So the situation in Novomikhailivka is getting worse. The Ukrainians are more or less pushed back to the northwestern part of the town itself. Bulita, no change. South of Velika Novosilka, no change. Orikhiv, we have a geolocalization of a fresh Russian advance to the east of Robotine, and basically between Robotine and Verbove, somewhere in this area here, the Russians have roughly reached this area here, and we have a Ukrainian mill blogger basically admitting that they lost this area and this here, which would be roughly this line here and more or less a line down here. So additional Russian gains in these areas here, but as of now, at least Robotine is still in Ukrainian hands. Further west at the front line, and then at Krinky on the bridgehead over the Dnipro, I cannot record any changes, so nothing seems to have changed overall. And as we can see, the Russians are still advancing at several points, but their advances have slowed down massively. At least as of now, the Ukrainians have more or less stopped the Russians. We have a video that has surfaced now. The Russians published it today, that shows us a strike on a column of Ukrainian vehicles. Now they are not moving, which seems to indicate that they are standing still. And this video shows the explosion, but in the past, YouTube has not been too happy if I show an explosion, even though nothing is visible. So you'll have no trouble finding that video. It's a strike on those here, and afterwards we can see the aftermath that shows several destroyed vehicles. Now the Russians claim this was done with an Iskander, a ballistic missile, and that those were 2 TELs, transporters erector launchers, for air defense systems. In this video they are claimed to be S-300. As we can see on the inscription. Later though, it said that this was, and the top here looks indeed like an MAN, the German truck company. Like this was, that it's claimed that this was actually an MIN 104 Patriot system that was hit here. 2, according to the claims, 2 transporter erector launchers that were likely delivered from Germany. That's why the truck chassis is looking like this, were probably destroyed by the Russians. As said, as of now, there are some varying claims. Some say this is in fact S-300. Others claim that this could be a munitions transport, because the video shows secondary explosions. So this was fairly clearly not a mock-up to draw in Russian fire. It seems to be authentic that the strike actually hit something, but as of what it exactly was, I cannot fully give a final verdict. We'll have to see over the coming days. At least it seems likely that the Russians managed to destroy two Patriot TELs. The whole thing happened here, close to Serhivka. And this is roughly 50 kilometers away from the front line here at Avdiivka, which kind of makes sense. If you want to strike the glide bombing throwing planes, you need to be able to reach them. And according to reports, they usually drop them from 70 kilometers distance. So giving it another 50 kilometers, and regarding that it takes some time for the missiles to reach there, it kind of makes sense that a Patriot system would be brought at this close proximity to the front line if it was used to strike the glide bombing planes, which would then give some credence to the Ukrainian claims of having shot down a number of planes. Anyways, as of now, I can't have a final saying. I'm not able to identify these wrecks as without any doubt to be the German ones. It seems fairly likely, and then of course on that chassis you have other equipment, other not all those chassis carry Patriots, but it's fairly likely that it was actually a Patriot system. As said, we'll have to see what's coming out here over the coming days. Overall, we also have pictures now from Ukrainian fortification works, which is fairly interesting. Now we see here, this is what is being built in the rear areas, as we talked about in the past. The Ukrainians have now decided to build deeper fortifications in the rear areas. We see here, this seems to be planned for overground, actually, with areas to shoot out. At least it looks like this. We see the big earthworks and heavy equipment in the background, and here you can see the trenches that are being built as well as Dragon Teeth also are being set up here as well, and here some underground shelters that are being constructed as well. And we have some additional pictures just for those of you who are interested in the way the Ukrainians built them up. There's also information about the fortifications that are being built up in the rear areas. Behind the front lines right now, the Ukrainians put an increasing effort to build a multi-layered defense, but this will obviously take some time. That's why we talked about, that's what we talked about in the last situation report, that the Ukrainians clearly use reserves now to stop the Russians at Avdiivka to gain time to build those fortifications. In troop generation terms, we have an interesting thing here from Russia. Russia is likely going to create a law that will allow it for criminals, instead of going to prison and instead of getting a prior, to sign up with the military. Now, this is something we've heard in the past centuries from other nations as well, and it's taking a revival in Russia. Obviously, it will help Russia to avoid doing a second wave of mobilization and thus forcing people into the military out of the middle class. This, on the other hand, will allow them to increase or keep up their recruitment rate that, at least in the last 1.5 years, has been able more or less to keep up with the losses. This is codifying then a practice that is already being used in certain areas, in certain courts, according to reports. This is already being used with some special parts of the Russian criminal system, which allowed a suspension of a sentence under what is the term, like especially hard circumstances. This was being used in the past to push them into the military. Now it's getting its own codification if this passes, which is obviously very likely. Then from India, we hear the claim that the Indian men are being trafficked to Russia to fight for Russia. In the last situation report, I showed you a video about Indian soldiers, Indian men claiming that they have been tricked and forced into the Russian armed forces. This is now from Reuters. Adding to that, we also have the first claims out of India, where people say family members have been forced into the Russian military, and some of them even have already fallen. The whole saying, it says here about 35 men. So this is not a mass thing yet. This is not in a big scale, but it's obviously, it seems to be increasingly clear that it actually happened. Then we have disturbing news for Ukraine. It seems like Russia is more or less copying the ground-launched small diameter bomb. Now, it obviously is vastly different, but it's using a small diameter bomb with 250 kilos. The interesting part is, not only does it have wings and tail section, so it's able to glide, it actually received an engine. It's unclear now. I found different sources. Some say that it can be launched by Smerch, multiple launch rocket systems, as its diameter is 30 centimeters and the Smerch system has a caliber of 30 centimeters. So in theory, it could actually be launched from these systems if the Russians manage to set everything up for that. That's the claim in one regard. Other Russian sources claim that it's being launched from planes. As it has an engine, it has a massively increased range and thus will allow the Russians to stay further back and avoid getting into the air defense range and keep pumping glide bombs, or in this case guided bombs with their own engine, into the Ukrainian rear, but also in the front line. And this is increasingly a bigger and bigger problem. Now we have first videos too from the Russians using FAB 1500, so roughly 3,000 pound bombs that carry close to 700 kilos, or what is that, 1,450 pounds of explosives, causing obviously massive devastation wherever they hit. This is one of the main reasons the Russians managed to gain those big advances close to Avdiivka. That was their increased use of glide bombs over the last weeks. We also have other weird innovation. There is now pictures showing that apparently the Russians have started to create cable-guided FPV drones. Now, this comment here says they made slow worse ATGM. While that could be a point, they are probably much cheaper than ATGMs, much easier to produce, and they can fly around targets and come back or drop from top downwards. So they can do everything an FPV drone can instead of an ATGM in this regard. So to disqualify it simply because they are cable guided, I think is misplaced. We'll have to see how efficient the usage is. Obviously, a cut cable can always be a problem, but the big advantage is obvious. They can't. Electronic warfare will be pointless as long as the connection with the cable to the operator is existent. This drone will not be involved, will not be able to be jammed with electronic warfare. Then we have in the political sphere some interesting information. Now Moldova has cancelled, has suspended the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe. It actually limits the troops of the Republic of Moldova to 210 MBTs, 210 armored combat vehicles, to 250 pieces of artillery, 50 combat aircraft, and 50 helicopters. Now, this is not the issue of Moldova. They are nowhere close in any of these categories to those limitations. The issue is probably more that that while they are not suspending it, they have to do reporting on movements, on positions, etc., to obviously then allow other partners in that contract to surveil whether they are in compliance. Russia has already cancelled the contract completely, and after Russia cancelled it, NATO and the US have suspended it, so it's no longer really of any effect in total. But for Moldova, it means that they also see the signs on the horizon. Then we have an article according to which Macron now said that an advance towards Odessa or towards Kiev could cause a French intervention. Now, this is Macron obviously showing strategic ambiguity without drawing clear red lines. He leaves himself an opening where he says that at that point we might intervene, but we don't clearly intervene. The issue is, while this might be right and while this should have been done probably much, much earlier, at the same time, other partners inside of NATO are vehemently saying we'll never send anything. But by now, France is no longer the only nation. Several other nations have already said we could think under certain circumstances to send troops into Ukraine as well. This, in the end, is basically realizing that the West has told Russia the whole time, we are never going to do this, we are never going to do that, whereas Russia has said nothing. They never said we are not going to do anything. Instead, they have threatened the West all the time, including with nuclear weapons. Now, Macron understood that this needs to be changed, and we see it here in action. Troop generation, we have information from Ukraine as well. And Ukraine said that by now 45,500 women are serving in its military, 13,000 among those in combat roles, so along the front line itself. And in international support, we have some news as well. The 800,000 shells that were organized by the Czech Republic are now financed. There are even claims that Norway found another 200,000, so it might be that 1 million shells is now coming to Ukraine. About the second part, I'm not 100% sure, but it seems that the 800,000 are fully financed and will come. The first deliveries will come within days, or at least within a few weeks. So there's light on the horizon for Ukraine. Soon they'll be able to fire back much more with their own artillery. Then also, which is going to help Ukraine, France, 3 defense companies from France have signed cooperation agreements with Ukraine. The production is supposed to start, of first things is supposed to start this summer. I did not find which things they are going to produce. So this could be minor spare parts. This could be artillery shells. Not too clear, but we hear it. This is a constant thing we hear about the last half year, more or less 6 months or something, maybe a little longer, that Western defense companies sign cooperation agreements with the Ukrainians to either produce inside of Ukraine or outside, and thus helping Ukraine manage to achieve their own supply needs in the future, in the near future, hopefully. Then there's news that Germany, France, and Italy are currently negotiating with Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia to buy back military equipment they have delivered. This is theoretically a lot of stuff. Now, it's unclear about what it is discussed, but if we just stick to MBTs, for instance, Qatar and Saudi Arabia have received several hundred AMX-30. They are more or less the equivalent to the Leopard 1, which is useful for Ukraine and which the Ukrainians appreciate. So this alone could mean several hundred AMX-30, as they are either already decommissioned or in the process of being decommissioned. And M60s are theoretically on the table as well. Obviously, this then, in addition to that, there's air defense systems, there is artillery, there is armored fighting vehicles, basically the whole setup, as the Arab region has bought a lot from Western nation, not just from the US, but also from European nations as well in the past decades. And a lot of this might be able to be bought back and then brought to Ukraine. And we see that we have another picture here that is kind of weird. This shows a Shahid drone that was actually intercepted by a windmill in Ukraine. As a German, I want to say Germany apparently then is well prepared for an offensive with Shahid drones, as Germany has, I think by now, 24,000 windmills. So, but this as a small joke aside. Now, this was it with the situation report. If you liked it, we'll go to the donation part right now. But if you like this, I really appreciate a thumbs up. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current situation? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. And I currently help with a donation campaign, or I've set up a donation campaign. It's mostly aimed at my German channel, where I'll do a live stream today where we'll try to collect money to buy pickups. And this here shows what they are going to do with the pickup. It shows how they remodel it. They basically turn it into an emergency evacuation vehicle that is receiving some splinter protection and then is being used to transport. As you can see here, they prepare to tie down wounded persons, to then evacuate them over rough ground to a collecting point, where then those wounded personnel is given to the ambulances to be brought into hospitals. So donating to this will actually save lives in Ukraine. And with the other donation campaign as well, this is a non-military thing, non-lethal thing, which, at least in my naive hope, will allow people who don't support Ukraine to still pitch in to basically help save lives in this. We have this is an example what will be done here. This is a training, so this is not a real wounded person, but it shows what is going to happen. I have a video of a heavily wounded person being transported, but then again, YouTube isn't too happy about showing blood, and if I blur everything, basically not much is to be seen anymore. So in case you want to pitch in, the pickups usually start at 5,000 to 6,000 euros. So we hope we'll find a couple of them, maybe 5 or something. Depends on obviously how much donations will be collected. I hope that I'll be able to increase the sum over time like I did in the last donation campaign. The link to donate is in the description, where you can donate either with PayPal or with IBAN. If you have a bank account in Europe, you'll find the link to that in the description as well. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description as well. But that's it from me for now. And the donation campaign you can find here. As said, the link will be in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.